a slightly nerdy football conversation that I think, no, I'm positive, by Monday evening, depending on how the game goes, this conversation will be on steroids. And I'm tired of it. I'm tired of the use of the term. I think it's reached the point of being ridiculous. And I think there's some history behind it that puts it in perspective. But the term that I'm sick of hearing is game manager. I don't even think anybody knows what they're talking about, and they keep saying game manager. Why is being a game manager a bad thing all of a sudden? Because I can give you examples how it used to be a really good thing. Now it's a bad thing, and it's used far too much. I think I know why it is now a bad thing, but it's been turned into a bad thing, and there's probably one player to blame for that. The term game manager. Jeff, what's the definition? Exactly what it says. And it's a good thing. So the term game manager had never been a term that has been used very much to describe a quarterback. I mean, not that I remember. I really don't remember it being used the way that it's used now. And again, I think I now know why it is. But when it's been used historically, it's been a positive thing. The few times I can remember some variation of it, I think we used to say stuff like, well, he manages the game well, blah, blah, blah. I like to use the term, and I think it's the same thing. You've heard me say many, many times, when it comes to hiring a quarterback, you want a surgeon. I want a surgeon. That's it. If you want to call that a game manager, call it a game manager. I just need to go from A to B. That's it. And you know what I don't need? Mistakes. That's it. That's it. That doesn't mean it has to be spectacular plays. That means I need to go A to B. And that's all. And that really did, to be honest, it really was the standard until recently. So it used to be, some variation of that used to be the best thing you could say about a quarterback. It really was the ultimate compliment. The critical label that has been used most often now, or back then was, and I say back then, I can describe generations of great quarterbacks, but the criticism used to be this. It used to be so-and-so is a great quarterback, but he can't win. And can't win in fill in the blank. Can't win an AFC championship, can't win an NFC championship, can't win the big one was the term used for decades and decades. That was the criticism historically of quarterbacks. And it was that whole generation of the sort of Dan Marino, I guess you go Dan Fouts, Warren Moon, Dan Marino generation of quarterbacks, the great generation of quarterbacks until recently, the greatest generation of quarterbacks around the league. And the criticism used was not game manager, that was a compliment. The criticism was Marino can't win or Warren Moon can't win. That's how you were measured, on that and that alone, not this game manager stuff. The guy that got all of those great players labeled, because I do think there's really kind of an interesting history to how this is all playing out, how I think game manager now all of a sudden has become a very critical term. It's almost dismissive. The guy that got all of the quarterbacks, and I can name a bunch, and you can too, and I think you probably should, the guy that got quarterbacks labeled, the guy that set the bar, that labeled everyone else, was Joe Montana. All of a sudden, if you don't win like him, you can't win. It wasn't game manager, it was you can't win like him. By the way, Joe Montana recently said that Dan Marino was the best quarterback to ever play the game, and I kind of agree. But guess what? He will never be regarded like Joe Montana, just like none of those guys of that time period, because they didn't win championships like Joe Montana did. You know Joe Montana was a game manager, don't you? You know he was a surgeon. He just won championships, and that's how they were measured. But so at the time, of course, Montana was considered until Brady came along. You know why Brady, of course, is considered the best ever? Because, well, I don't know, he won championships. He was a great game manager. He managed the game and his team won, period. He didn't run around. His team just won, period. He didn't take unnecessary hits. They just won, period. That was it. That was the measurement. So it was Montana, then Brady, of course, same measurement. You've got to win like them or you're sort of in some weird way viewed kind of a failure. So you had that whole generation of players up until the bar was raised by Montana, and then it was raised even further by Brady. You had, Dan Marino, Dan Fouts, Warren Moon, who I argue all the time is one of the most talented passers ever to play the game. I'm not sure anybody had a better arm except Dan Marino. I'm not sure anybody was a more pure passer, but didn't have the infrastructure to win championships like Joe Montana because, well, Montana was a great game manager. So was Brady. They won. That's it. So that whole generation, it was Dan Fouts, Jim Kelly, Dan Marino, Warren Moon. For a while was Steve Young. Same thing was said about Steve Young. In fact, Steve Young, if you think about it, it's interesting to think about Steve Young, the quarterback, and think about Patrick Mahomes, the quarterback. Young was criticized because, one, he followed Joe Montana, replaced him, did not win immediately like Joe Montana, and was more of an athlete and wasn't a game manager. People said, well, guys, you can't play the position that way. You just need to throw it through windows and sit down. But it was that group of guys that were held to that Montana standard, and that's how you were judged. And then, of course, Brady, made it even different. So they were stuck with that label. You can go back and just think about great passers of the time. Dan Fouts was a great, great quarterback. You could stick Dan Fouts in San Francisco around the same team that Joe Montana had, and guess what? They probably would have won a championship or two. You could stick Warren Moon in San Francisco with the talent that Joe Montana had, and they'd win a championship or two. They would. Those guys weren't stiffs, but they were held to a standard set by Montana, then raised by Brady. I bring it up because I think the standard now is set by one guy, and it's turned game manager into a criticism. It's really kind of a diss now. So you can't win the big one. It used to be the label. It used to be what we would say about guys all the time. If they couldn't live up to the Montana, then the Brady status. And now it's different. Now it's game manager. Joe Montana invented the position and the way people looked at the position. I don't mean invented it just to play quarterback. I'm talking about how we looked at it and how you were measured. Because all we cared about with Montana, again, the ultimate game manager, was that they just finished the game with more points than everyone else. They just won a championship. And that was it. He and Brady were great game managers, the greatest game managers. So I think if you put, Dan Marino in any of those teams, they still win, but it didn't work out that way. So Brady raised the bar even further, same kind of thing. The greatest game managers of all time, and the standard used against everyone else was championships, and can you manage a game like them? Now, today, the bar has been moved, and it's because of Patrick Mahomes. It is. We just look at it differently. The description is different. Saying game manager was the greatest compliment to the two best players to ever play the position, Montana and Brady. It's all we said about them. We've never seen anyone manage the game like them. We've never seen anybody move their team like them. We've never seen all those things we used to say about those two guys now is a criticism. And just like Montana set the bar, I think Patrick Mahomes has done the exact same thing to the guys going up against. If you don't make spectacular plays now like him, you're just called a game manager. You're just meh. You're Dak Prescott. Meh. You're not Patrick Mahomes. Meh. Used to be you're not Montana because you don't win championships. Now it's you don't make spectacular plays, so you're just a game manager. So the bar's been raised. And Dak Prescott and Brock Purdy are criticized for not being Patrick Mahomes. That's what it's turned into. I think it's ridiculous. I think all people look at is quarterbacks and think that's everything. You do know the Chiefs are in the Super Bowl because of their defense, right? You do know, arguably outside of Mahomes, the best player on the field is their defensive tackle, right? You do know that's what matters in the end? No? Nobody knows that anymore? So here you got this guy, Brock Purdy. And I view him very similar to what I would view Dak Prescott. And they are now all of a sudden almost like second and third tier, fourth tier quarterbacks because of how they play. I know what people are going to say about Dak Prescott. Look, the Cowboys didn't lose in the first round of the playoffs because of Dak Prescott. You do know that. They lost because their defense was trash. It was trash. The 49ers didn't almost lose to the Green Bay Packers in their first-round playoff game because Brock Purdy wasn't Patrick Mahomes. They almost lost because their defense was trash. In fact, they came back and won because the game manager played really well. But this whole game, the Super Bowl, will turn on him again. If the Chiefs go out and win, if Patrick Mahomes goes out and does what he's done, manage the games. He completed 17 passes in a playoff game. That's not 70, that's 17. But it's how he does it. And it's just changed the outlook. It's changed how people see things in a great way. I mean, he's the most ridiculous sandlot player ever to play the position. I did say sandlot, yes. He is the greatest pickup game player ever. He's the guy in the backyard who runs around and throws it sideways, and nobody saw it coming. So if Kansas City beats San Francisco, even if Mahomes has a game manager-like afternoon, complete 17 passes, Brock Purdy is stuck with a label he won't be able to shake. It'll be a label like Warren Moon got. It'll be a label like Dan Marino got, Dan Fouts. I mean, go down, Jim Kelly, although they kept getting the Super Bowl. It's this label that's, I think we recognize they were great players, but it does stick you in a class by yourself where you're not allowed in that other club. It wasn't Warren Moon's fault they couldn't get over the hump. It wasn't. It wasn't Dan Marino's fault. But what will happen by Monday? I don't care if the 49ers give up 12 yards a rush. It'll be blamed on Brock Purdy, and he'll be called a game manager. The Cowboys get their defense completely trashed, and Dak Prescott is blamed for being a game manager. And all these unfair labels that don't really look at the total of the game. It's the fantasy football-ization of football now, how people see it. We don't even see the whole game. All we see is the ball leave a guy's hands. That's all we know. We have no clue about giving up 5 yards a carry or something like that. It's just how we view games now. But it's now created that label. And that label, because of the way Mahomes plays, because he is, the term now is off script. I'm just saying it's a sandlot. The guy's the greatest sandlot player of all time. Like, he could just go draw up plays in the dirt, and they work out. There's no one like him. And because there's no one like him, all of a sudden we got to come up with a criticism of everyone else, and that's going to be Brock Purdy, who's a good player. He is. He can't play defense. So the exact compliment we gave Montana and Brady is now a criticism. And it's used all the time. It's a negative because Patrick Mahomes changed the narrative. He changed the way the position looks. He changed the way we looked at it. And he turns an NFL game into a backyard football game unlike any player we've ever seen. And that means the prism in which we watch a game now is if you don't play like that, you must be boring and a stiff and a game manager. Brady would now be called a game manager, and he'd be criticized. He's a game manager that's not good enough. And if San Francisco doesn't win, it is, here are the guys who are going to get it. These guys are stuck in this space for the next few years until they win a championship, and even then, they're stuck in this space. So you had that generation of Marino, Fouts, Warren Moon, Jim Kelly. Had that group were stuck with a label. Great players of their time, but they got stuck with a label. You know who's going to get the label now, who already has it, and I think if Kansas City wins again, it gets even worse. Brock Purdy, Dak Prescott, Jared Goff. They get a label. The label is, you're just that game manager. And it really just means you can't play sandlot football like Patrick Mahomes. That's what it really means. It's the exact same discussion, just in different ways, sort of like looking at art in different ways now. That's the way we look at it. It's a compliment to Patrick Mahomes. I mean, he really is the greatest sandlot player of all time. No one's like him. Even Andy Reid yesterday, cute, lovable Andy Reid, who obviously knows a little bit about the position. You think? You think the guy doesn't know what he's doing? Even Andy Reid had to come to the defense of Brock Purdy yesterday.
Yeah, listen, he's a heck of a player. I remember specifically one of the Saturday afternoons watching him in college, and I remember the head coach saying, "This guy has changed our program." So changing a program, that's something that's big, and that's what he is. I mean, he's doing that in the National Football League, and last week he did as much with his legs as he did with his arms. So he ran the ball well. He's a good football player. He's smart. Got a great feel for things. Yeah.
See, even that was meh. They don't win. He's stuck. They don't win. He's stuck with the label, and who gets it even more is Jared Goff of the Lions and Dak Prescott of the Cowboys.